The young pilot was watching the retired captain's hands. He gripped so tightly, he thought. Modern piloting isn't like this. But then the emergency lights started flashing, and at that moment, he realized those tense hands weren't just habit. They were survival instinct. Jake Thompson was 28 years old and saw himself as the future of aviation. MIT graduate, digital systems specialist, and training to become one of American Eagle Airlines' youngest captains. Today was his final evaluation flight from Chicago O'Hare to Dallas, and sitting beside him would be retired Captain Henry Hank Richardson. "Captain Richardson, right?" said Jake as he entered the cockpit. "I'm Jake Thompson. I'm really excited to be flying with you." Hank was 67 years old, a man with gray hair and a deeply lined face. His hands? Jake immediately noticed. These hands held the controls with that old habit, tense as if something could go wrong at any moment. "Hello, Jake," said Hank, his voice carrying the calm of years. "I've been retired for a while, but I'm here today for your evaluation flight." "Are you ready?" Jake smiled and gestured to the modern cockpit. "Of course." "Do you see this A320neo? Full digital systems, automatic navigation, weather radar, collision avoidance system. The plane practically flies itself now." Hank nodded but said nothing. Jake noticed that as the old man looked at every button, every switch on the control panel, his hand still maintained that old position, as if he was waiting for something. As the plane rolled toward the runway, Jake continued explaining how modern technology worked. "Look at this autopilot system," he said, touching the screen. "I enter GPS coordinates, connect with air traffic control, the plane calculates the route itself. I don't know how it was in your time, but pilots get much less tired now." Hank watched silently. "Good system," he said briefly. But Jake kept noticing his hands. These hands never relaxed. They stayed positioned as if ready to take control at any moment. "How did you used to fly? I mean, without all this technology?" "I listened," Hank said simply. "What did you listen to?" "Everything. Engine sounds, wind, how the aircraft felt. I could feel with my hands what was happening." Jake laughed internally. These old guys were always like this. Instead of trusting technology, they'd talk about feeling and such. But modern aviation didn't work that way anymore. The flight was going as planned. Jake had engaged autopilot, systems were working perfectly, weather was good. Everything was under control. "Do you see?" he said proudly. "Modern aviation is completely data-driven. No guesswork, no feeling. Just science and technology." Hank nodded but said something that surprised Jake. "Jake, keep your hands on the controls." "Why?" "Autopilot is on. Everything's under control." "Just keep them there." Jake shrugged and placed his hands on the control yoke. He immediately noticed the aircraft was vibrating very slightly, but everything on the screens looked normal. "This vibration," said Jake. "Engine," said Hank calmly. "Left engine. The sound's been changing for about 3 minutes." Jake looked at the screens. "But all systems are green. No warnings." "Not yet." And then it happened. Beep! 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 The left engine failure alarm started blaring. Red lights filled the cockpit. Autopilot suddenly disengaged. "Engine failure! Left engine!" Warning flashed on the screen. Jake panicked. "How is this possible?" The system showed nothing. "Because systems only tell you after the problem occurs," said Hank, now taking control. "But that engine's had a sound change for 5 minutes. If you'd listened, you would have heard it." The situation was getting worse. The aircraft started losing balance. Jake tried to remember emergency procedures but couldn't think clearly from stress. "What do we do?" "Emergency landing?" "No," said Hank calmly. "We'll fly on one engine." "But manually!" "No autopilot? Navigation system confused. We've lost contact with air traffic control." That's when Jake began to understand who Hank really was. The old pilot gripped the controls with such ease and precision that the aircraft seemed like an extension of his body. His hands were no longer tense, but in perfect control. "Jake, listen," said Hank while stabilizing the aircraft. "Now I'm going to teach you real piloting. Don't look at the system. Feel the wind. It's coming from the left, which means it'll pull the aircraft right to compensate for this." Hank adjusted the control yoke with a very slight movement. The aircraft found its balance. Listen to the engine sound. The right engine is working normally, but under extra load. We need to reduce RPM, but not lose power. How? Jake was amazed. Everything he'd learned in training was about trusting systems. But now the systems weren't working. "I don't know." "Lower the aircraft's nose very slightly. Use gravity's help. This way, we'll need less engine power." Hank was teaching Jake step by step, but this wasn't theoretical knowledge. This was instinct from 40 years of experience. "Now landing preparation. What's the normal procedure?" ILS system, automatic landing assistance, ground proximity warning. "Not working." "You only have your eyes, hands, and experience?" "Do you see the runway?" Jake looked. The runway was visible in the distance, but he didn't know how to approach. "Look at the wind," said Hank. "How are the trees swaying?" "Estimate wind speed." Jake looked at the trees. "About 15 knots?" "Good. Direction?" "Left-south." "So we'll do a crosswind landing. Turn the aircraft into the wind, but correct at the last moment. Timing is everything." On landing approach, everything was opposite to what Jake knew. Screens weren't helping. Automatic systems weren't working. There were only Hank's hands and experience. "Jake, now you're going to do it," said Hank. "Put your hands on the controls." "Me? But I don't know how to land like this." "You'll learn." Now, because this is real piloting. Technology gets you this far, but what saves lives is the feeling in your hands. Jake tremblingly took the controls. Hank was guiding. Nose slightly up. Now left wing down. Feel the wind. Listen to the engine sound. Runway straight ahead. And at that moment, Jake felt it. What the aircraft was telling him, how the wind was affecting it, what the engine vibration meant. "Landing!" Hank shouted. The aircraft touched the runway. It wasn't a perfect landing, but they were safe. They were alive. When the aircraft stopped, Jake was shaking, both from fear and excitement. "Captain Richardson, how did you do that?" Hank smiled. "Jake, I need to tell you something. I'm not just a retired pilot." "What do you mean?" "I flew for 41 years. I spent 20 of those years in the U.S. Air Force, in Vietnam, in the Gulf. Then I moved to United Airlines. 21 more years of commercial flight." Jake was shocked. You're a fighter pilot?" "I used to be. But the main point is this. I lived through times when there was no technology. We only had our hands, ears, and instincts, and that never changes." "Why didn't you tell me this?" "Because you only trusted technology. Sometimes technology leaves you halfway, then only piloting remains. Real piloting." As they left the cockpit, Jake was a different person. Now he held his hands differently, more carefully, more ready. "Captain Richardson, I have a question for you." "Ask." "You knew all along, didn't you?" "That the engine would fail?" Hank stopped and looked at Jake. "Jake, I've made thousands of flights over 40 years. During this time, I learned one thing. Aircraft always talk to you. You just need to know how to listen. And from the moment you heard that engine sound, you were ready." "I'm always ready. Because technology is a wonderful assistant, but it can never replace the pilot. You fly that aircraft, not the other way around." Jake nodded. I'll fly differently from now on. Good. But remember, use modern technology, but don't be its slave. You need to stay there as the pilot. Always. That day, Jake Thompson didn't just take a flight, but learned the lesson of his life. Technology was magnificent, but real skill, experience, and instinct could never replace it. And Hank Richardson? He wasn't just a retired pilot. He was someone who knew what real piloting meant, who flew with his hands and ears, who survived in an era without technology. Jake now held his hands differently, just like Hank, ready, alert, and open to listening. Because now he knew, real piloting wasn't in the systems, but in the person sitting in the pilot seat. And sometimes those old school techniques were the most valuable treasure of the modern world.